Welcome to the America 250 PA Start Here, America Did podcast, telling the unique stories that make up the diverse fabric of Pennsylvania.
Welcome back to another episode. I'm your host, Sydney Harris. Today, we're heading to South Central Pennsylvania to a place where stories of revolution, resistance, innovation, and everyday life all come together to shape a rich and distinctly American history. York County and its History Center. We're joined by Dan Fink, Vice President of Marketing and Public Relations at the York County History Center, an organization dedicated to preserving and sharing the county's legacy through its museums, archives, and historic sites. From the Revolutionary era adoption of the Articles of Confederation to York's industrial contributions during World War II, the stories told here show just how profoundly one county can help shape the nation's broader history. Together, we'll explore the moments, people, and places that make York County a vital thread in the fabric of our Commonwealth and our country. Dan, thank you so much for being here. We're so happy to have you.
I am happy to be here.
And we're so excited. Can you start by introducing the York County History Center and its role in preserving and sharing the rich heritage of York County?
Sure. So the York County History Center has been around with various names since 1895. Started out as a sort of a clearinghouse for genealogy information, and that's still to this day the crux of what we do, a genealogy library and archives. Over time, we've added historical sites to our portfolio, so we maintain 4 sites currently. Colonial Complex, which includes a couple of buildings that date back to the 1700s and have been restored to what we believe to be their original state. We have a replica of the York County Courthouse that is similar to the one that was in Continental Square in downtown York back in the 1700s. And we operate a York County Fire Museum. But our newest building is the new York County History Center, and we just moved into that last year. We opened it to the public last summer, and we're off to a good start with that property. It was voted by readers of the USA Today as one of the 10 best new museums in the United States. We finished number 3 ahead of the Dolly World Museum in Dollywood and a bunch of other really good museums. So we feel like we're off to a pretty good start with our new building.
So York has quite the history. When visitors explore your History Center, what are some of the major moments, movements, or figures from York's history that tend to capture their imagination?
There are a couple of things in York's history that are really worth noting. First, our ties to the colonial period. History happened in York. The Continental Congress during the American Revolution, after the British took Philadelphia, Congress fled west. They stopped in Lancaster, decided it wasn't far enough, safe enough from the British, so crossed the river, settled in York, and were here for 9 months. And among the things that they did while they were in York was draft the Articles of Confederation, which became our first sort of constitution. And they signed an alliance treaty with France, which brought the French into the war with us and was an important factor in helping us defeat the British. There's the Civil War. We have some significant ties to the Civil War. The early skirmishes before Gettysburg happened in York County. The Confederates took York. They moved east to Wrightsville, and to stop further Confederate advances, there were some Union soldiers burned the Wrightsville Bridge. So Confederates had to turn around and head back. And then there was the Battle of Hanover in southwestern York County, in which the main thing that happened there is Confederate General Early got sort of disoriented in where he was in relation to General Lee. And so it delayed his arrival at Gettysburg by a day, which ended up being one of the decisive factors in that battle. So Underground Railroad stops in York County. There was a black businessman at the time, William Goodridge, who had one of the most detailed Underground Railroad stops. But there were other folks in York who played a role in the Underground Railroad. And the history goes right up into the 20th century. The York Plan was a plan developed by businessmen in York at the start of World War II, when the United States was still trying to ramp up industrial production for the war. York leaders got together and developed a plan to refit York manufacturing and coordinate production to maximize our output for the war effort. And that plan became the model for many towns and cities across the country. Into the civil rights of the 1960s, we had racial unrest in York. 2 folks died as a result of gunfire in York. One was a woman, Lily Bell Allen, who was visiting relatives in York. Another was a police officer. And out of that came an effort to promote community healing known as the York Charrette. And some of what happened as a result of those conversations is still being felt in York today.
York, like we've talked about, its history is varied. And one county really is making this huge and has made this huge deal in American history. In your view, what makes York County's history unique compared to other parts of Pennsylvania or even the nation?
That's an interesting question. There are a number of ways that York's story connects with the stories that have happened across Pennsylvania and around the country. I would say one of the things that makes York unique is our story is not as well known as the stories that maybe have come out of Gettysburg or of Philadelphia or even in Harrisburg, the state capital. So some of the little known stories I've mentioned already, the Articles of Confederation drafted in York, and that was an important document for advancing the idea of a United States of America. Just our proximity to the Mason-Dixon line, escaping slaves coming from the South, heading north, using stops in York County on the Underground Railroad. And then just the people that have shaped history, York County's history and the nation's history in various ways. We like to hold up, and we do this, in my view, very effectively in the new museum. We have spotlighted dozens of individuals who have shaped York County's history and how they connect to the events happening nationally. So people like Loretta Claiborne, who is a Special Olympics athlete from York, who is known internationally for her efforts to promote Special Olympics and advocate for people with disabilities.
We actually had Loretta come on an interview. She was really wonderful. Yeah.
She is a treasure from York, for sure.
Yes, she is. And so whether it's the Revolution, the Underground Railroad, or York's industrial legacy, what are a few stories that you feel deserve even more attention? Could you share those with us?
Sure. So I've mentioned a couple of them already. William Goodridge, who was a black businessman in York County. He had a barber shop, and his family was involved in photography. There's actually a small museum on Philadelphia Street today at where his business was located that celebrates his contributions to York, both as a businessman and as an advocate for the black community, and obviously a stop on the Underground Railroad. There were women from York County who were involved in the suffrage movement that worked on behalf of gaining women the right to vote. Anna Dill Gamble is one of those folks. There's a black woman by the name of Etha Cowles Armstrong, who also advocated, a member of the NAACP in the 19th century. So there are people like that we feature in our museum on what we call our History Makers Tower. So, I'm happy to tell you more about that. But as far as industry, York seems to have been over time a place where industrial era innovation happened. So we had companies like the York Manufacturing Company, which became York International and was a major player in manufacturing of heating and cooling equipment. For a long time, it was their machinery that cooled Olympic hockey rinks. York Barbell is a York company that for many years was associated with weightlifting equipment, including providing equipment for the Olympics. The York Peppermint Patty started in York and was made in York through the middle of the 20th century until it was acquired by the Hershey Company.
I'd love to hear about your History Makers Tower, if you could tell us a little bit about it.
Sure. So it's the first thing you see when you come into the new museum. Just to give you a sense, our building was repurposed from what had been an abandoned electricity generating plant used by Metropolitan Edison for many years, dated back to the late 19th century when electricity first came into York County. It had been vacant since the 1970s. We identified it as a location that would help us consolidate into a history campus. And so the defining characteristic of it when you come into York from the outside is the smokestack that rises up out of the middle of the building. So when you go inside the building, you see the bottom of the smokestack, and arrayed around it are dozens of screens, monitors. We have images of history makers displayed on these monitors. And at the bottom, there are a couple of interactive touch screens, so you can noodle around on the screens to learn more about who's on the tower. And we very intentionally developed the tower with an eye towards diversity. We have people here who are well known. James Smith, who was one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence, born in York, died in York, buried in York. We have Loretta Claiborne is one of our history makers. And then we have people who were not as well known, but still in one way or another contributed to the history of York County, including folks from the Black community that we have never been able to properly acknowledge in our previous museum lives, people from the Hispanic community. So it really is a sort of impressive introduction to the story that we're trying to tell, and it reflects the diversity that we're trying to convey, and it incorporates the actual building itself as an artifact in the museum.
And it sounds like you're really trying to get the community involved. How do you see York County's history still influencing your community today? Are there traditions, industries, or local pride that traces back to these historical roots?
There are. I mentioned earlier the charrette that was organized after the racial unrest in the 1960s. The purpose of that was to address the problems that the community at the time felt led to the racial unrest, problems involving the relationship between residents and the police, but also problems related to access to healthcare and the public transportation system. So out of those conversations grew what is now the rapid transit bus system, which is now serving low-income and medium-income folks who maybe don't have transportation or ride to work. This is how they get around York County. It led to the creation of Family First Health, which is a community health center to improve access to health care for the community. So those are some of the things that from the charrette that are still around today. In the museum, we have a section called Renewal Theater. We run on a loop a number of videos that encourage people to think about the idea of renewal. And among those videos are York County traditions like making Fosnocks or baseball. Sandlot League baseball is a tradition that has been handed down from fathers to sons, generation to generation. But we've also got videos on Temple Guard, which is a youth development program for kids that the YWCA operates. And if you've ever been to York on a major community event, you probably would have seen and heard Temple Guard. They're a drill team. So lots of loud drumming, coordinated drill movements. And they've performed all over in Washington, D.C., New York City. They're one of the best known things about York for people in York. There are things like that the community still takes a lot of pride in. And York County is certainly a place that loves its history. They value people that have fought and served in wars, the accomplishments of locals. When somebody from York makes it big on the national stage, people know who they are. We have, there's a woman from Hanover named Ann Roth, who is an Academy Award-winning costume designer. We have Jeff Koons, who is an internationally known artist, still lives in York. So people take pride in their history and the people who make that history, for sure.
It's really cool to hear that your museum focuses not only on York's role in the greater American history, but also the things that York's community values. So it's really wonderful hearing that it's dual in that fact. It's both local, but national as well. So for someone visiting York for the first time, what do you hope that they take away or understand about the area's role in American history?
I think it's important, and this isn't unique to York. There are small towns all over Pennsylvania and the United States that have stories that weave into the national story. I would say I would want a visitor to York to take away a couple of things. One, they should know about the Articles of Confederation and the importance of that document. I think historians for a long time tended to overlook the Articles as just something that was cast aside in 10 years when the Constitution was ratified. But there were elements of the Articles, and just in the idea of the colonies sending representatives to work together to decide what is the role of a centralized federal government. How much authority should the states have? Those conversations happened for the first time when the Continental Congress ratified the Articles. So that's important. I think it's important, too, to note that York has had a hand in some of the most significant events that have happened in the United States. There was a woman from York. She wasn't from York originally, but she moved to York. She was a kind of a civil rights pioneer. Her name was Daisy Myers. She and her husband settled in a suburban area outside of Philadelphia. They were the first black family to move into that area, and their house was actually targeted, and they were forced to eventually sell their house, and they moved to York. She was a teacher, elementary school teacher, and they lived a quiet life in a suburban house for many years, and people should know her name because she is a symbol of civil rights in ways that are similar to other civil rights figures. And she's featured on our History Makers Tower, too. The contributions of people like that should be remembered and celebrated.
Over your time working with the History Center, is there a particular story, artifact, or even visitor experience that has really stuck with you?
The artifact I've been talking about, the History Makers Tower, I hope, at the risk of sounding repetitive, I hope if people hear this and come to York and come to the museum, I hope they spend some time with the tower because it really is an impressive thing. And you can spend a good bit of time just exploring who's on the tower and finding out why they're on the tower. The story that sort of is one that is particularly compelling to me is the story of the four chaplains. So this is about four men, chaplains, during World War II who were on a troop transport ship. The ship was attacked by Germans in the Atlantic and sunk. And in the course of getting soldiers off the ship, the chaplains, as they were running low on life jackets, the chaplains gave up their life jackets. And they all died with the ship. And one of the chaplains was a rabbi from York named Alexander Good. And so their sacrifice and their names are remembered each year at an annual breakfast. Alexander Good has an elementary school in York named for him. That story is one that I never get tired of hearing and telling. And then there's an artifact that we have. It's actually not a single artifact. It's a collection of folk drawings by the folk artist Lewis Miller, who lived in York in the early part of the 18th century. He did hundreds, perhaps thousands of these folk drawings of life in York. And he captured everyday lives. He talked about the people of York. And he captured significant events. He was around during the Civil War when York surrendered to the Confederates. He had a drawing of the burning of the Wrightsville Bridge. His folk art is considered among the best snapshots of life in America in the 19th century that exists. So if you come to York, you'll see murals around town of several of his drawings. So that's another thing that York takes a lot of pride in.
That is really cool. I've actually never heard of those drawings, but to hear that they really represent 19th century life.
You can see one of the first depictions of a decorated Christmas tree in one of his drawings that showed, I think that dated back to like the early 1800s.
That is so cool. Are they any different than our modern Christmas trees?
No, it looked very similar.
Yeah, really cool. We have a lot of our listeners who are really interested in history, specifically Pennsylvania history. I'm thinking we might have some that are interested in how they can support York County's History Center's mission and help keep these stories alive for future generations, how can they do this?
Well, I appreciate that question. The York County History Center receives very little government funding. People sometimes will think that because we have York County in our name that we're a government-operated agency. We are not. Less than 5% of our funding comes from government sources, and most of that is local sources. So very little state and federal dollars come to us. So most of our operating revenue comes through donations, people who attend our events and programs, people who become members. And those dollars help pay for the expense that accompanies taking care of the artifacts. We have to keep our library and archives in climate-controlled spaces because these are paper documents that would deteriorate in conditions that were humid. Same for the physical artifacts. The buildings that we maintain for the public to view that have been restored back to their 18th century state, those are expensive to maintain. When we have to do repairs, we go back to the original slate roof materials, for example. Those we have to track down and find businesses that specialize in doing that kind of work. Community support is critical to what we do, and sponsors that partner with us for community events. All of that makes up close to 50% of our operating dollars. And so we can't do what we do without the generous support of the community. If you're interested, our website is yorkhistorycenter.org, and you can find pages for donating, pages about how to be a sponsor for an event, how to become a member. We would love to be able to have people from not just inside of York County, but all across Pennsylvania come and see the history that York County has to offer.
And I hope they do. And I want to say thank you again, Dan, for being on our show today. It's really been wonderful having you, hearing about York County and its History Center. So thank you for being here.
I appreciate the invitation. It's good talking with you.
It's been a pleasure having Dan Fink and the entire team at the York County History Center remind us that history stays alive through the people who continue to share it. From revolutionary debates to industrial breakthroughs, York County has played a remarkable role in shaping the story of Pennsylvania and the story of America. And thanks to the History Center's work, that legacy isn't just preserved, it's made accessible to every visitor who walks through its doors. Be sure to visit the York County History Center, explore its many sites, and take part in the stories it continues to tell. Thanks for listening. Until next time, stay PA proud.
Hi, everyone. I'm Cassandra Coleman, Executive Director of America 250 PA. Thank you so much for listening to today's podcast. We encourage you to learn more about America 250 PA and send us your podcast ideas at america250pa.org.
This has been the America 250 PA Start Here, America Did podcast, produced by Commonwealth Media Services. Stay tuned for more epic Pennsylvania stories at america250pa.org.